I'm Allie with Potomac Beads. Join me in making this spectacular regatta necklace featuring that nice nautical flaglet with our triangles. If you do need any supplies, don't forget to hit that little link below in the description to shop with us online at PotomacBeads.com as well as PotomacBeads.eu. As always, gather up your materials on your bead on a board and let's get started in this beautiful necklace adventure. So to begin our triangles here, we're going to end up connecting them together. I'm going to show you how to make the first one with its first connection point, and then we'll go in and we'll just keep adding and adding and adding. So this is a take on the traditional triangle setting where you do herringbone and then peyote stitch, and we're switching it up just a little bit. I'm going to start my center with my 4mm blue zircon beads. I'm doing 3 of those to create my triangle, and I'm holding the bottom of my white thread with a size 12 needle. I'm going to go down to the base here of the thread and simply tie this in a knot. If you want to use a stop bead, you can do so, but honestly, it's less work just to tie it in a knot. And for this pattern in particular, with the size of everything here, it's not going to be an issue as far as seeing the knot later on. After you do so, I want you to sew through bead number 1. So we just tied the knot of bead number 1 and 2 to 3 together. And you're coming out here and we're going to add 2 of our silver beads. So this is going to be the start of our herringbone spines of our triangle. 2 go on and you're going to sew through the next triangle. Just kind of push them in there. Next 2 go on and you sew through the next triangle. So you're doing everything in sets of 3. So everything we do is going to be done 3 times. Once again, sew through that 4mm bead, as well as sew up through bead number 1 in the first set of 2 that you added. You want your needle coming out between those first 2 beads. So here is the herringbone stitch where we're going to add 2 more beads. And then we're coming out of bead number 1, we're going to sew down into bead number 2. At the same time we sew down bead number 2 for this first rotation, you're going to go through your 4mm triangle. So we take 2 trips around the 4mm triangles. We're going to add a second row here to the herringbone stitch. So you're coming out of bead number 1, you add 2 beads, you sew down bead number 2, and then straight across through the 4mm crystal as well as through the first 11-0 in the next corner. From here then, 2 more get added on. I want you to sew then down through bead number 2 and then up through those first 2 beads that are stacked. So bead 1 from row number 1 and bead 1 from row number 2. You're sewing up to the top there. You can see now that herringbone style where you have beads coming and sitting on a V on top of one another. We're going to do the same thing here where we're going in and we're adding 2 more beads. We're coming out of bead number 1 and we're going to go down bead number 2 of the previous row and just down that second bead and out. So your thread's going to be coming out between the first and second rows of the herringbone stitch. From here, looking at our triangle samples, we're going to add 5 of our Delica beads that are going to arch over top of our blue Zircon 4mm bicones. The Delica beads that I'm using are 11-0 lined cobalt luster, and again we're going to count to 5. So here we have 5 beads on. You're going to sew over top of the crystal and into bead number 1 of row number 2 of that corner herringbone stitch. Coming out there, you're going to add row number 3 of your herringbone stitch. Sew down through the second bead of row number 2. Coming out then between rows 1 and 2. Give a nice tight pull there. Grab 5 more Delica beads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then again, sew over top of the crystal, ignoring basically that it's there, and sew up through bead number 1 of the next herringbone corner from the second row of that herringbone stitch. We're going to add 2 more beads in that same herringbone style, and then we're going to sew down through bead number 2 of that same row. Coming out bead number 2, that's our final rotation here to add in our 5 seed beads. And then we're going to sew up through row number 2, because remember we're on row number 2 of adding our beads. We're adding our 3rd row, but we're always coming out of and going into our 2nd row as we add the 3rd. I'm going back into that 2nd row and out. Now my thread's coming out of the 2nd row of herringbone, and I just added the 3rd row. So I'm going to do what's called a step up, and I'm stepping up to the top of that next row here. I'm going to add a 4th row of my herringbone stitch, as well as we're going to add in some seed beads in addition to that. So we're going to go in and we're going to continue with that group of 2, sewing up through bead number 1 of the 3rd row we just added, so down bead number 2. That gets us our 4th row of our spine. And now we're ready to connect to our beads on our peyote stitch. So you have your 5 beads here that we're going to catch into. And when you have the 5 beads, we're going to begin with going through and adding in a crystal here, and then sewing through, adding in a Delica bead and then a crystal. So our pattern, we're switching now to 2mm bicones in the same color. I'm going to skip that first Delica, and I'm going to sew through the 2nd Delica. So I'm coming out the previous row, row 3 of my herringbone stitch, after adding row 4. I'm skipping the first Delica and sewing through the 2nd after I add in a 2mm bicone. I'm going to add in a Delica, skip over that next Delica, and sew through the 4th Delica bead. Next, you're going to add one more 2mm bicone. From here, you're going to sew into that 3rd row rather of the herringbone stitch. So you're coming out of the 3rd row here, you're going into the 3rd row. I'm going to do that one more time. So we're going to go in and add our 2 beads in our herringbone stitch. Coming out bead number 1, we sew down bead number 2 after we add those 2 beads. Get them to sit nicely so that way you have a nice tension on your thread. Add a 2mm crystal, skip the first bead in that row of 5 Delica beads, sew through bead number 2. After I sew through bead number 2, I'm going to add one more Delica, skip over bead number 3, and sew through bead number 4. Once you're through bead number 4, you add another 2mm bead and sew up through the next herringbone. I have one more rotation to do of that, adding in my seed beads and repeating the exact same steps. Adding my 2mm, skipping my first bead, sewing through my 2nd bead for a perfect fit, adding a Delica bead to sit in the middle, and then once again sewing through bead number 4, exiting my piece, adding my 2mm crystal. When I add this 2mm crystal, I want to make sure I'm back at the beginning here and I have my 4 rows, but I'm working off of row number 3. So you want to make sure to go into that 3rd row of the herringbone stitch. At the same time, if you want to, you can go into the 4th row, stepping up to start your new rotation. Give a nice tight pull, and that's the start of your triangle. From here, we're going to go on and add in some 11-0 seed beads, as well as a drop at the base of our triangle, and a point here for connection using right angle weave to add all of our triangles together for the chain portion of our piece. So as you're coming through and you are getting ready to do your last and outer row of your triangle, you can see how pretty these are just as earrings that you could attach here to the top, and you can really go to town with these, connecting them on the angle every other to do as a bracelet, triangle up, triangle down, and connecting them in this form here so they line up and they kind of go every other way. We're going to connect them in this long line to attach to our pendant piece. To do so, the first side is going to have one of my Delica beads. I'm sewing instead of 2 beads in that herringbone stitch, cornering it and topping it off with 1 Delica. To continue the peyote stitch, I have one 11-0 seed bead, and then I sew through my crystal. Another 11-0 seed bead, sew through the Delica that's there, because we're doing just peyote right here in this middle stitch. Again, 11-0 through the crystal. Once you're through that crystal, 11-0 up through the herringbone. So you can see how easy it is, basically almost like fitting puzzle pieces in, getting from one side to the other. This next side here will be the bottom. For the first 2 beads, so there's not more hanging down along my back, I just used one Delica there at the bottom as well. To progress, to have it a little bit of a drop, what I have here is the Crystal Lab Full Teardrop. I'm going to add 1 Delica, 1 drop, 1 Delica, and then sew back in to the next herringbone stitch. So just like we've been doing. So instead of adding 2 beads, this time we added 3. You can see how that gives just a nice little drop effect. From here, 11-0 goes on, go through your 2mm bead. Once again, 11-0 through the Delica bead. You have all these openings, they're quite obvious. It should hopefully be pretty easy to keep track of this, but we are doing peyote stitch right here. As we finish this up, we're coming to our final corner. If you're keeping this as is, you can just put 1 Delica there. I'm going to make it so that I have my connection point to add my next Delica or my next triangle on to it. So I want to be able to link these together. So we're going to create that link first. I'm going to add 1 of my Delicas, then I'm adding 1 of my 11s, 1 of my Delicas, and a 3rd bead, or a 4th bead rather, 1 11. From here, you're going to sew back through that first Delica bead. So it's Delica 11, Delica 11. So back through that first Delica toward the 11-0 seed bead. That rounds this out into a little section that is ready for some right angle weave. After adding those 4 beads, sew down through the 2nd bead of that herringbone stitch. So you can see how that sits then right on the corner. I'm going to finish up my Delicas, or I'm sorry, my 11-0 seed beads, going through here. And then I'll get ready to start my subsequent triangles. So 4 11s go on. And into the last corner there. And now to finish this off and tie the thread end together, you're going to simply sew down the spine here in towards the interior and tie the thread ends together. Because I know I'm going to need to connect this, so this is the first one, and I wanted to start with just 1 single bead so you would understand. While I have thread and needle on my hands, if you want to add the corners after the fact, you're coming out the Delica bead, add an 11-0, a Delica 11-0, and sew back into that Delica. See, I now have those connection pieces on both sides of my triangle. From here, I'm going to sew down through the spine, so just down through that herringbone row, toward the center, bringing my needle out right before the crystal. Sew into the crystal, and you're going to sew around till you have a match-up with your thread ends. So I'm going around here. I'm actually going to bring my thread to the back, not sewing through any beads, just sewing through an opening there, so that way I can see where I need to take my thread to in order to knot the 2 threads together. In goes the crystal, and then knotting these 2 thread ends. When we do our next crystal triangle, I am going to make sure that I'm linking this one in to the next one as I'm making it when I get to that final row of my herringbone where I'm adding in my Delicas. So I'm going to now create a second one of my triangles. If you need to, you can always slow down this YouTube video in the settings. You can flash back to step number 1, building that triangle, and then join me as we get ready to connect our triangles together. So I'm going to go ahead, start my next triangle, and we'll get ready to build off. As you create your second triangle after you're done doing your first initial peyote row with your crystals, and you're coming out through that 4th row of herringbone stitch. What you want to do is connect it to the previous triangle. To do so, I'm coming out of bead 1 there. I'm going to sew down into that other little right angle weave section that we added in number 1. Then I'm going to sew down through bead number 2 and out. So see how that right away connected those 2 triangles together. You just have to be mindful now of, all right, where is the bottom? So I'm going to go in here, and the next one is going to have the drop. So turning the bead, I'm going to go in here and add my 11s, add those 4 11s between each of this peyote here. Thread a little bit longer. And you will end up using a fair amount of thread. I usually cut about 4 to 5 feet of thread. That'll give me 2+ of these, and then I'll just put on a new piece. After you have those 4 11-0 seed beads on, again, take stock every time you get to one of the corners. All right, here I know I'm ready for my Delica, drop, Delica. Coming out of bead 1, I go into bead number 2. Then showing that connection point in the final corner, I'm going to add my 4 11-0 seed beads, just like we've been doing. They always go on the exterior just to give a little bit of that silver. If you want them to be even bigger, you can go around one more time if you want to. Just figure out your seed bead count. Then when I'm out here on the corner of that 4th row of the herringbone stitch, once again I do Delica, 11, Delica, 11. Gather those 4 beads on your needle. Sew back through that Delica bead toward the 2nd bead. So you're rounding out your thread, going around in a circle, pulling that tight, then into bead number 2 you go. Make sure when you go into bead number 2, you give a nice little tight yank on your thread, not your needle, on the thread to tighten up so you don't have any extra thread exposed. Finish up then with your row of 4. 1, 2, 3. Then I'm going to show you an important tip. Coming out the end here, I'm going to use this thread and needle to help reinforce the connection point. This is always a great idea if you have a component piece like this where you're making everything independently, because that connection point here is going to have a lot of wear and tear. So to do so, I'm coming out of that corner there. I'm going to go through the 11-0, or the Delica that we shared, wrap around the 11-0, so I'm spinning around all of these beads. Up into the 11, up into the Delica, back down to the 11, so you're going the whole way around that circle of beads, back into the Delica to tighten up that connection spot, and then I'm sewing in down towards the interior. You want to look at the end of each triangle, and you're probably going to end up with about 10 triangles or so on each side if you want the whole thing to have triangles, 10 to 12, depending on the length you want. Coming in here then, you're going to look back to your previous one and say, all right, there's the knot. I can see the knot on the back. So let me make sure when I do this secondary knot, I take this thread to the back, and I'm trying to get all the knots facing the same direction. So that way I don't see a lot of my thread ties. I'm going to continue then, just adding in, adding in, adding in, making it longer and longer. Like I said, I have 8 here. I'm going to do 10, but I'm also going to make sure in the back just to do a nice simple right angle weave, and we'll connect that and do that connection as we add the 2 right and left pieces together. The reason I did not start with the actual pendant portion is because some people may want to make this necklace with just the triangles, and that's perfectly fine. If you forget also to add triangles together, so say I want to add these together here after the fact, my next triangle that I make, I just need to make sure that I link in to both of those beads. I ran out of thread here on this one, so I am going to do one linking them together and then using my 11-0s to decorate the top. As we're finishing up the little triangles here on the sides, we're going to start to concentrate on the middle. Now, if you don't want to do the middle and you just want it to be triangles the whole way around, you just keep proceeding. To do the triangles, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 on one side, or 9 on the sides, and what I'm going to do is the middle. So I have this Color Shift Moonlight 14 millimeter Rivoli, and we're going to connect 3 triangles together. So I have the first 2 made, and I only did a drop on one. The second one I kept and did the triangle, that little right angle weave connection at every corner connecting in. So I'm getting ready to do my third here, and I'm going to connect that third triangle in. I've already done that right angle weave along one of the corners. I'm going to come to the other corner, and then we're going to connect it in. So as I'm going along here, adding my 4 seed beads, I'm going to get to the point where I need to add these last 2 corners in to connect this into my triangle. So coming out that corner, I'm going to look to the other side, catch on to the 11 Delica there. So down here, back through the bead. From here, once again, connecting to my third corner, I'm adding my 11 O's. And 4 11 O's get added in each section here. So I'm adding that last 11 O, and then I'm going to connect that final side together. Connecting these 2 here, that's going to give you the triangle, which is going to create the bezel for your 14 millimeter Rivoli to sit inside of. Over here on this other side then, you can see the Delica that you need to connect to. Sewing through the Delica, and then back down the herringbone on the opposite side. As you sew down the herringbone on the opposite side, with this third one, I want you to keep the needle attached. We're going to keep the needle attached so we can sew in our seed beads that can be used for this center. So from here, to get to the center of my triangles, I'm going to take my thread and needle, and I'm going to go over and finish up my side here. So adding in my 4 seed beads. And then once I have that final side finished, I'm going to sew down toward the middle of the piece. Going up here, I'm going to sew down through that 11 O seed bead there that's shared, and then down towards the interior, down through that herringbone row of my 4 seed beads. Once I'm there, I'm going to sew through the crystal, come over to the other side, and circle up so I'm coming out one of the interior 11 O seed beads. You see those set of 6 there? You're just going to go right along your herringbone and your interior crystals in order to get there. And then you can see, ooh, I'm here on the side. You can see how these are going to connect with just a couple little crystals to make that standout section as we add in the crystal in the middle. Now that my 3 triangles are connected and I'm down here coming out of one of my 11 O seed beads, I'm going to get ready to create a nice simple netted bezel for my 14 millimeter Rivoli to sit inside of. This would also look great with green colors, and you can give your feedback of colors you pick down in the comments section below. I love the idea of green rather than kind of that nautical blue for the regatta, that you could make it green and it would look very leaf-like and maybe a flower in the middle. All right, so coming out of this 11 O seed bead, you want to make sure that you're coming out of the second seed bead. You are going to grab 5 more 11 O seed beads. I want you to sew back through the first of those 2 seed beads. So I'm coming out the second bead here on the interior. I'm going to grab 5 beads and sew back through that first one. Add 1 11 O seed bead or Delica bead, and sew back through that same 11 O that your thread was coming out of. That creates a little loop or a little flower petal. We're going to continue to create 4 more of those. Sew down after that bead that you're coming out of, down through the crystal, and down through the next 11-0 in the center of your triangle. From here, I'm going to sew through my corner beads over to the next triangle. So where I'm picking up is, see that little right angle weave group of beads here that's connecting the triangle? You're going to pick up the interior 11-0 seed bead, and then as well the first 11-0 seed bead prior to the crystal on the next triangle over. That connects the corners there, and we're going to repeat that group of 5. 5 more 11-0 seed beads go on, and I'm going to circle back through those same beads. So just like I did on the side here where I made a loop, I have my thread and my beads my thread and needle coming out of those 3 beads. Now I'm going to add 5 more beads and sew back through those 3 beads yet again. What that's going to do is circle those beads up to make another one of my little petals. From here, we're going to sew through the crystal, through the next 11-0, down through the Delica bead that's next, and out the 11-0. So once again, we're coming out that same place of where we just started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beads go on. Go back through that 11-0 prior, add a Delica to fit in that space, and go through the 11-0 that your thread was originally coming out of. That circles around and gets those 5 beads right there again in that little flower. From here to the next corner, through the 2mm crystal and out the 11-0 seed bead. When you're out the 11-0 seed bead, look at that corner and see where you need to go. You're going to go through the 11-0 seed bead that works as a connection between those 2. So right there. You're going to go through the first 11-0 on the next triangle. And then once again, repeat that 5. Once you have those 5 seed beads on, you're going back through all 3 of those beads once again. While your thread and needle are in there, go ahead and go back through the crystal if you can, and the 11-0 seed bead. That way you're going through all at once, and it's going to make you a little bit quicker at doing this. Coming out here, I'm going to go down through the Delica bead, out through the 11-0, grab 5 more beads, circle around, going through the 11-0 prior, add your Delica. Sew through the crystal, the next 11-0 seed bead, after the crystal, and repeat again for this final corner. Going through the 3 seed beads that line the corner, the one on the connection point and the first one on the next triangle. Add 5 more beads, and once again, circle back through. When you're circling back through and you're coming out of those beads, we're going to sew up to the top. So right now it looks kind of funny. You have 6 little portions there of your beads that are coming up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 3 corners and the 3 middles. I'm going to sew back up through the 5 beads that my thread just added till I'm coming out of bead number 3, that peak there, that corner. From here, I'm going to add 5 of my Delica beads. From those 5 Delica beads, grab that next peak bead in the set of 5, which is going to be right above that Delica that you added. Once again, add 5 more beads, and sew through the next group of 5 through the middle bead, bead number 3. I've got 2 down. I'm going to put my project down, turn my little leaves towards the top, little leaf flowers that I made, push them out towards the exterior. I'm actually going to, before I get too far, drop my crystal in the middle there. Hold the crystal in place while you continue to do your groups of 5 seed beads, and then sew into that next 3rd bead in the next group of 5. I have 3 more sets to do, which will then hold in that Rivoli. The reason I'm popping that Rivoli in there now is just so I can hold those beads, those little flower petals of 5 off to the outside. Go through that middle one there. You can see those fit right around the exterior of this 14mm Rivoli. To the next one here, and then one more to finish those up. Get the tail out of there. You can see I'm spinning and kind of holding as I'm working with it. 5 more Delicas go on, and then back into that first seed bead. I'm also going to sew through those 5 Delicas that I added first. So see those 5 Delicas that I'm sewing through that I just added. Give a nice tight pull. And now what we're going to do is sew through all of those 5 Delica beads, skipping over the 11 seed beads that we were originally grabbing in on. I'm just going to sew around all these 5 groups, putting them in there, trying not to hit my burn on my finger. At least dinner tasted good. And going into these extra seed beads then, I'm circling the whole way around all 6. And you can see as I'm pulling tighter here, it's pulling them into almost a star shape and really making sure that we are not going to lose our Rivoli from our bezel. Every time I have a bezel like this with a crystal stone in the middle, I'm going to make sure to take my needle and thread around the last rotation of thread 2 times. So I just did it once. As I do it a second time, it will pull it even tighter and get that Rivoli to stay even more in place, but it's a perfect fit in there. It almost sits up on a pedestal. From here, after taking this through one more time, I'm going to show you how we're going to make the connections to the sides of our project in order to add our sides that we have here to each side that we have completed. So to finish off from the front now, I am going to come down through this side. So I've gone around twice to get kind of that star appearance in the middle. And I'm going to go down through the 11 on this side and then down towards the back. If you have enough thread on, keep it on. That's great. You can use it for your connection points. I'm going to knot my thread off back near this last triangle that I was doing, that I'm using the extra thread from, and get rid of it and then start with a new piece for the connection points. When you finish your sides and it comes time to add these beautiful sides in together, prior to putting on our clasp, we're going to do the connection point right here with our right angle units that we've created. Now I'm adding new thread. Ideally, if you have some thread left, you could have left some hanging out there so it's woven back into the project a little bit. What I'm going to do to start is I'm actually going to go back to, since I'm adding new thread, back into my herringbone stitch from my one side, and then go around one more time into that right angle unit. That's going to get it a little bit more stabilized and make it so this thread here basically has a starting point. So I've gone the whole way around that right angle weave. We're going to add a little bit of crystal here to the bottom, and that crystal then is going to add for a little shine right before my little triangle pendant. I'm coming out through my end bead, the one that I would connect onto for that right angle weave to connect onto my next triangle. And instead of connecting onto the next triangle, we are going to do right angle weave here. So we are going to pick up some of our crystals and some of our 11-Os, and we're going to do some exaggerated right angle weave. One 11-O goes on, one crystal, followed by another 11-O. Go through that corner bead there from your pendant piece. And again, remember, if you want to, you don't have to do the pendant piece. You can just do the little flags the whole way around. Coming out the top then, 11, crystal, 11. If you want to, you can put a drop there at the bottom. You can use 4mm instead of the 2s. It's up to you. I'm then going to go down through the Delica on the opposite side that my thread was originally coming out of as I do that crystal connection right there. You can see it's just a nice little simple connection. From here, I really want to get it so that I have more strands going through prior to this heavier piece in the middle. So I'm going back through my beads, retracing my steps, and when I get over here to the Delica, we're going to reinforce that last section of right angle weave here. So like we've been doing when we come back and we end one of the triangles, we're doing the same thing here. Reinforcing the thread around that right angle unit, reinforcing the thread right here on the right angle unit that you've added. That now is a better connection point because it has more than one piece of thread going through. Sewing back down into the project, I'm going to go through my piece on the other side here, down through that herringbone line, and then take my needle and thread toward the back of the piece because it definitely has a front and a back, and take my needle and thread toward the back, just through the back. No beads were added and I didn't go around any other threads. I'm going to bring both back here and tie my knot and those two thread ends together. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here, and then we'll add the clasp in the same fashion to the back of the necklace. So once you have your center connection made and everything's attached to the middle here, it's time to do the clasp, and I'm using a really simple cup button as the clasp because I want it to sit comfortably on my neck. You can do a lobster clasp and extension chain too if you want to make it so you can wear it at different levels. Coming out of the last of my triangles here, I have my thread attached, and I've added my 11-0 crystal 11-0, just like I did at that center connection point. From here, I'm going to go up through my crystal cup button. I'm going to add onto here an 11-0 of the Delica, one of my crystals, 11-0 Delica. And I'm using the 2mm crystal there. I'm going to come down the other side of the button, and on the opposite side, all we're going to do is the loop. And here on the opposite side of the button, we're going to repeat. So we're doing 11, crystal, 11, sewing back into that same Delica that our thread was coming out of. So just right like that. So the end is going to match perfectly to the middle. Going up through then, I'm coming back up through that whole side, reinforcing my clasp, taking my thread and needle back through the crystal, back down through the Delicas, down through the opposite side, and then I'm going to sew back in a little bit on the project to stabilize it. On the other side, all we're going to do is a loop, and the loop is going to have approximately 28 seed beads. So we're going to come out of the Delica on the other side here. We're going to do one 11-0, one 2mm crystal, followed by 26 to 28 of our loop of 11-0 seed beads, and then again reinforcing and finishing up the end. So it's the exact same thing, but instead of a button, we just make a loop of seed beads. I'm going to sew down into my project a little bit and then tie off my thread end. Flip over and finish off the other side. So on the other side here, making the loop for the button, I have my 11-0 seed bead on and then my one 3mm crystal. I have 28 beads on, and then I'm sewing back through that same crystal, adding another 11-0 seed bead after it, and then sewing back into that right angle weave bead. So making a little triangle here so it sits a little bit nicer on the end. From here I'm going to reinforce, going back through the crystal, going back through all that line of seed beads, tightening it up, and then again weaving back down through and tying off my thread end. At this point then, you're going to be sick of making triangles, but the end product is going to be beautiful. I cannot wait to see everybody's renditions of these in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making, and to see everybody and their take on this regatta necklace and how they make it their own. Whether or not you're making just the pendant, you're not making the pendant portion at all, whether or not you're just doing earrings, and seeing how you go about with your color selection is really exciting for me. I love seeing everybody's creations, and you can post them in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. And don't forget to comment below with your color combinations, and if you do post a picture in our Facebook group, make sure to comment below. That way people can go back through the YouTube videos and they can see the comments about the different selections that have been made for the projects and the color switches that people have established. As always, thank you so much in joining me through the labor of all the triangles to make this regatta necklace. As always, and as I've just said, make sure to post pictures of your designs in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. I've also noticed that a lot of you don't subscribe to this YouTube channel and may watch the videos, so don't forget to hit that little subscribe button so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. As always, you can also comment below. I've said it numerous times, but let me know what color combinations you're making. Any modifications, you can also do the spacing further for your triangles if you want as well. This came out with 9 triangles on each side to about 17 inches. And then along with the middle, if you want it longer, just extend. You can always use a lobster clasp and extender chain there as well. As always, thanks so much for joining me. Enjoy your regatta design. Give a little thumbs up and always share this video if you love it and want to share it with a friend. Thanks so much and have fun creating.